Welcome to Anti-Tank Chats. In this series, we will take you through the history of infantry anti-tank weapons. In this episode, we'll be looking at the development of the German World War II reusable rocket-launched shaped charge anti-tank weapon, the Panzerschreck.
Please remember to like, subscribe or click the little notification bell if you don't want to miss out on these videos. And I'd just like to say thank you to all our patrons for making this possible. Please join them if you can.
Normandy, late July 1944. Having just shot across a road junction in his Sherman tank, 19-year-old Second Lieutenant David Render, Sherwood Rangers, halts outside a white stone cottage in the village of Brickazard, a few miles west of Villers-Bocage.
I reported that I was firm on the radio and was about to call Lane's Sherman forward when a bloody great explosion ripped into the grass bank a few feet to the left of us. The enemy bazooka team was located less than 30 yards away in a cottage garden across the green and must have panicked. Their second round was also a miss and went high over my head, shattering the roof of the cottage and showering the tank with slate shards. I was already shouting fire control orders into the mic before the Germans managed to get their third shot in. Martin traversed the turret to the left, firing the coaxial 30 cal as he went. Stamping on the main armament fire button as soon as the turret slew to a stop, he was spot on with the first HE shell. He swiveled the turret a few inches left to right and hosed the houses down with MG fire. I watched a second round impact among a score of scurrying figures. They were trying desperately to get out of the gardens and escape the heavy weight of fire by running between the houses. But at that range, we couldn't miss, and machine gun bullets and shell fragments cut them down to a man.
The dead were Fallschirmjäger, and Render was surprised that they'd missed him, but this was the first Panzerschreck attack that they had experienced, and the Panzerschreck was duly scooped up and set back to HQ. It was a prize, apparently the first Panzerschreck to be captured by the British in Normandy. Render's recollection of this action not only demonstrates the danger that Allied tank crews faced from Panzerschreck and Panzerfaust, but also highlights the deadly cost to German anti-tank teams if they missed their target. With a single-use shaped charge anti-tank weapon, the Panzerfaust, already in development, the Germans looked to produce a second reusable anti-tank weapon to replace the obsolete Panzerbuchse 39 anti-tank rifle. What would become one of two direct influences on the development of the Panzerschreck, the Raketenwerfer 43 Pupschen, or Dolly, really came down to the design of the ammunition. It was the Pupschen's calibre, in this case 8.8 centimetres, which would have a major influence on why the Panzerschreck did not adopt the 60mm size used by the US M1 bazooka. On the plus side, what the Raketenwerfer offered the infantry was the ability to penetrate 160mm of homogeneous steel at 500 metres range. But ultimately, the Raketenwerfer was let down by its weight, which made it difficult to easily manhandle over rough terrain on the battlefield. For sure, it was significantly lighter than the obsolete 3.7cm Pak 35-36, but it still weighed a hefty 328 pounds, or just under 150 kilograms. So it was hardly the man-portable anti-tank weapon solution what the infantry were looking for. Moreover, although the use of a breech eliminated any backblast, it did produce considerable muzzle flash, an obscuration, when fired, and any recoil was transferred directly through the carriage into the ground. Just over 3,000 were manufactured at quite a considerable cost. Ultimately, as captured examples of the M1 bazooka began to filter through to German design departments from November 1942 onwards, it was clear that the Pupschen's design was found wanting in comparison, being less efficient and versatile, and a decision was made to develop a similar lightweight launcher tube. Basically, the Pupschen's rocket warhead was suitable for use, but required a different firing mechanism and longer body. Initially, the new design went under a number of names at the early stages of its development: Harvest Wreath, Raketenpanzerbuchse 54, and Offenrohr stovepipe, before receiving its official Hitler-approved name, Panzerschreck Tank Terror, at the same time as the Panzerfaust. Almost 315,000 were manufactured before the war's end, with 3/4 of that figure being produced in 1944. A shortened barrel version, the Raketenpanzerbuchse 54-1, was produced by converting existing Panzerschrecks and cutting off 340mm section from the rear. The reasoning was that in the original form, the launcher was unwieldy, and that such a long tube didn't add to the weapon's range or reduce the effect of the rocket propellant blast leaving the barrel. 25,744 were converted by March 1945. Turning to the 8.8cm rocket itself, whilst the Raketenwerfer and Panzerschreck ammunition were not interchangeable, they shared the same shaped charge warhead. However, what had changed was that the 3 kg 7-pound Panzerschreck 4322 ammunition was around 160mm longer than the Puchens. Unfortunately, the museum does not have an example of the Panzerschreck rocket ammunition, but in descriptive terms it featured a long nose cap containing a striker, point detonating fuse and detonator which allowed the shaped charged jet the standoff space to form. The point detonated fuse for the Panzerschreck was sensitive. Having been developed from a rifle grenade, an arming pin was fitted to reduce the chance of premature detonation. On hitting the target, a booster charge located at the base of the shaped charge pental filling would detonate, collapsing the liner. The main propellant tube housed the primer and igniter and 7 propellant sticks. A black powder propellant igniter pellet was located above and below the central stick and connected by a celluloid igniter tube. At the rear, the 40mm circular tail fin housed the electrical primer fuse, nozzle and igniter wire, which were used to initiate the electric rocket motor, which ignited the tube and burnt the propellant sticks, building up pressure. One of the interesting developments with the Panzerschreck ammunition was the issuing of 3 types of additional ammunition to overcome problems associated with high and low temperatures experienced by users on the battlefield. The concern was that the warmer propellant got, the higher the pressure, which increased the potential for fatal propellant explosions when the Panzerschreck was fired. Consequently, a summer rocket variant was produced, designed to operate in higher temperatures, 40 to 50 degrees Celsius. Conversely, freezing temperatures experienced during the winter, especially on the Eastern Front, could lead to the rockets burning too slowly. Consequently, 2 ammunition variants were produced, with a 1944-45 version capable of operating at minus 25 degrees Celsius. It's most likely the operators would use what rockets they had to hand, regardless of the temperature conditions, especially if they were under immediate threat of a tank attack. Moving on to the weapon itself, the museum's Panzerschreck example is the Raketenpanzer Buchse 54 in the dark yellow paint finish, but could be found in camouflage and whitewash versions. It weighs 9.4 kilograms, just under 21 pounds, making it around 6 pounds heavier than the Panzerfaust 60, 5 pounds heavier than the M9A1 bazooka, but 13 pounds lighter than the Piat. The smoothbore barrel is 1.65 metres in length. The tube features 3 15mm wide and 1mm deep press ridges. The ridges apparently eased the manufacturing process, protected the barrel from dents, and helped to reduce bore wear and friction, giving it a life of 1,000 rounds, although the chances of surviving long enough to fire that many rounds would appear to be remote. The operator is advised to lightly oil the inside of the barrel and check that there are no dents or holes. At the front of the barrel, on the left, is the steel front sight, which can be adjusted by means of a wing nut. It's gradated for ranges from 100, 150 and 200 metres. The rear sight holder is still in place, albeit it's missing the later addition of the 5 aiming V-grooves, which allowed the gunner to engage moving targets. And usually fitted just in front of the rear sight would have been a detachable protective shield to allow the operator to fire without the need for a mask, hood or gloves, which were initially issued due to the risk of the burns from the rocket exiting the launcher tube. Later additions featured an extra piece of metal to cover the shield clasp in order to protect the operator's exposed right hand. Examination of the paint on the museum's Panzerschreck suggests that a shield was not fitted, as there's no evidence of a clamp being used. Interestingly, the museum's shield example has the Finnish Army's 3-colour green, brown and white camouflage scheme. Factory-produced shields were available from February 1944 to replace unofficial improvised shields, which came in a variety of shapes and sizes. The shield has a square cut-out window frame designed to allow the operator to line up the front and rear sides, but was found to restrict observation. A glass window would have been fitted with a taped surround to protect it when firing, with spares carefully wrapped and carried in the box in the rear of the shield. A laminated glass replacement was introduced in 1945 due to the high instances of shattering of the original glass. The front of the shield also had 3 brackets to attach camouflage, such as small branches, to break up the outline. Shield added 1.5 kilograms, 3 pounds to the Panzerschreck's overall weight. The Panzerschreck was set to be fired with the launcher resting on the operator's right shoulder, using the shoulder support and rest provided. In the centre of the barrel is the pressed steel handguard with wooden hand grips, which protects the cocking handle, safety release and the trigger. The rocket's electrical firing wires would attach the connector box via the socket. The latch on the top holds the rocket in place, and a wire breech guard provides protection and helps guide the rocket into position. The 8 manuals produced make it clear that it was important that the loader had cleared any obstructions, flammable material, etc., and that they were not firing from a confined space. With this achieved, the loader would position themselves to the left of the tube, behind the gunner, and could start to pull the rocket's retaining tape, releasing the contact plug and firing wire from the tail fin. The pin in the nose fuse was also pulled, arming the rocket for firing. Unsurprisingly, dropping the rocket on its nose whilst armed was to be avoided. The operator then pulls the cocking handle to the rear until the safety is engaged. The loader inserts the rocket into the launch tube. The contact is then plugged into the contact box. Now the Panzerschreck was ready to fire, and the operator could depress the safety release on the cocking handle, which would spring forward. With the trigger engaged, the operator could use the rear and front sights to line up the target, aiming at the centre of the vehicle for a static shot or using lead marks if the target was moving. When firing the Panzerschreck, the operator could fire from a prone or kneeling position and will place the weapon on their right shoulder, resting it as loosely on the upper arm as far forward as possible. Firing upright was only recommended if the operator used a wall or tree to lean against. If firing prone, the operator was able to stabilise the Panzerschreck for firing by using the handguard and angling their legs to the left to avoid the heat and flames of the backblast. The rocket would continue to burn for around 2 metres once it had exited the barrel, similar to the Pupschen, creating smoke and dust. The Germans did not appear to have solved the issue of burning the propellant in the tube as the Americans had achieved with the bazooka. Panzerschrecks started to be slowly issued to troops from October 1943 onwards, equipping dedicated tank destroyer units and selected infantry divisions. By 1944-45, approximately 83 Panzerschrecks were available per infantry regiment. Tactically, Panzerschrecks were best employed from concealed positions, targeting the flank and rear of AFVs in ambushes on avenues of approach. Keeping tanks buttoned up and blinded by supporting units using infantry fire, smoke and artillery was crucial in allowing Panzerschreck teams to manoeuvre. The 2-man Panzerschreck teams tended to be held in reserve and brought up when needed. Given the fire, smoke and dust kicked up when firing Panzerschrecks, moving positions after firing was recommended. There is evidence of Panzerschrecks being used in a mortar role at Casino in 1944, but the advice was that, given its limited anti-personnel capability, the focus should be on using it to attack tanks. In defensive situations, Panzerschreck teams were usually deployed in teams of 3, 2 up with 1 behind, with up to 150 metres between positions. This allowed teams to cover a front of 450 metres and 300 metres in depth, but this was dependent on suitable terrain and with clear avenues of approach. Slit trenches were frequently used, allowing Panzerschreck teams 360-degree fields of fire. To recognise successful infantry 1-man anti-tank kills, the Germans introduced a Panzer kill decoration, which was introduced in March 1942. Silver for 1 kill, gold for 5. The award was extended to Panzerschreck crews in December 1943, highlighting the danger that the crews faced. Around 18,450 had been awarded by the end of the war. In terms of effectiveness, the Panzerschreck offered the German infantry a multi-use anti-tank weapon with which to engage targets at longer ranges than the Panzerfaust. However, a report by Guderian on anti-tank effectiveness in the first 4 months of 1944 on the Eastern Front indicates that the Panzerschreck was significantly less effective than the Panzerfaust, achieving only a third of the tank kills attributed to the Panzerfaust, 88 compared to 165. The Panzerschreck was also more wasteful in its kill achievement ratio, requiring over 2/3 more rounds to knock out a tank. That's 1,061 per kill compared to the Panzerfaust 691. For the Western Allies in Northwest Europe, the Panzerschreck and Panzerfaust were an increasing threat from D-Day onwards, with kills peaking over 20% in July 1944 and April 1945, and reaching a massive 41% in the final days of fighting in May 1945. It's possible to surmise a number of reasons as to why the Panzerfaust may have been more effective than the Panzerschreck. Firstly, they were more widely distributed and easy to conceal, were less awkward and heavy to carry, and did not produce the same amount of flame and smoke giving their position away. Secondly, they had a more powerful penetrating capability, 200mm compared to 160mm. Thirdly, they needed to be used at closer ranges, meaning more chance of gaining a hit. And lastly, they could be used more effectively in volley firing or tank stalking scenarios. To sum up, the Panzerschreck gave the German infantry another multi-use anti-tank capability to replace or supplement the other anti-tank defences at their disposal. It wasn't perfect, given its size and weight and the tell of its backblast, but it was an improvement on the Panzerbuchse 39. Ultimately, as a German version of the bazooka, with little in the way of improvements, its post-war legacy didn't last much longer than producing scrap metal from consumer goods and going into storage with the Finns.